I'm Ethan Mitchell, 32, and 7 years ago my older brother Jake framed me for stealing $50,000 from our family construction business. Dad threw me out without a second thought, choosing to believe Jake despite my pleas of innocence. I lost everything that day: my family, my job, my home. Now the tables have turned. Their company is failing while I build my own success. Yesterday, they called begging for my help to save them from bankruptcy. What they don't know is I've been planning for this moment. Before I continue, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to see how I turn the tables on the family that abandoned me. Growing up in Portland with my father Nathan and brother Jake was complicated. Mom died when I was just 7 from breast cancer, leaving Dad to raise 2 boys while running Mitchell Construction, the company he built from nothing into a regional powerhouse worth several $1 million. Dad was a practical man who believed in hard work and loyalty above all else. He expected both Jake and me to join the family business, though he never forced us. It was understood we would eventually take over when he retired. Jake was 3 years older than me, and from my earliest memories, there was always tension between us. While Jake inherited Dad's physical traits: tall, broad-shouldered, naturally athletic, I took after Mom's side, more intellectual and analytical. These differences might have complemented each other in a healthy sibling relationship, but something in Jake saw my differences as threatening. "Jake's going to be running the operations side one day," Dad would often say. "And Ethan here has a mind for numbers. He'll handle the finances." Dad meant this as a compliment, recognizing our different strengths, but I always noticed how Jake's jaw would tighten whenever Dad praised my abilities. By the time I started college for my business degree, Jake was already working full-time at Mitchell Construction. I worked part-time in the finance department during school breaks and summers. It became clear quickly that I had an intuitive understanding of business operations and finance that Jake lacked. The employees noticed it too. "You've got a gift, kid," Troy Wilson, our company accountant, told me once after I'd spotted a billing error that would have cost us thousands. Troy became something of a mentor to me, teaching me the ins and outs of construction finance. "Your brother works hard, but you've got the mind for this business." Dad's favoritism toward Jake was subtle but unmistakable. When Jake made mistakes, Dad would defend him. "He's learning," or "everyone makes mistakes." But my errors, far fewer though they were, would be met with, "I expected better from you, Ethan." I tried not to let it bother me, focusing instead on learning everything I could about the business. By my senior year of college, I was working nearly full-time hours while finishing my degree. Jake had been promoted to operations manager, but rumors of his extended lunches at casinos and racetracks had started circulating among employees. I began noticing small irregularities in the book's expense reports that didn't match receipts, cash flow discrepancies, invoice anomalies. "Dad, I think we should look into these expense reports," I said one evening, showing him documentation I prepared highlighting some concerning patterns. "Your brother has a lot on his plate, Ethan," Dad replied without really looking at my evidence. "He's working 60-hour weeks in the field while you're sitting in an air-conditioned office. Cut him some slack." The dismissal stung, but I respected Dad too much to push back. Instead, I confided in Troy. "You're right to be concerned," Troy said after reviewing my findings. "But your dad has a blind spot when it comes to Jake. Be careful how you approach this." Jake's resentment grew as I gained respect from employees and clients. Despite being the younger brother with less experience, people increasingly came to me with questions and problems. I tried to deflect and include Jake whenever possible, but his insecurity only worsened. "Everyone thinks you're so perfect," he spat one night after we'd both stayed late at the office. He'd been drinking, something happening more frequently. Dad's golden boy with his college degree and fancy spreadsheets. "That's not true, Jake," I said calmly. "Dad always takes your side. Because he feels sorry for me," Jake shouted, his face reddening. Poor Jake, not as smart as his little brother. "Well, you know what? This company will be mine someday," Dad promised me. I didn't argue. There seemed no point when he was like this. What I didn't realize was how desperate Jake would become to ensure that promise was kept. The day everything changed started like any other. I arrived early as usual, reviewing the previous day's transactions when I noticed something alarming. $50,000 had been transferred from our operating account to an unknown external account. The transfer had been authorized with my credentials, but I hadn't made it. A cold feeling settled in my stomach as I dug deeper, discovering the transfer had occurred the previous evening, hours after I'd left the office. The $50,000 discrepancy felt like a physical weight on my chest as I stared at the computer screen. Someone had used my login credentials to transfer company funds to an external account I didn't recognize. The transaction timestamp showed 8:47 p.m. the previous night, at least 2 hours after I'd left the office. I immediately called the bank, but they confirmed the transfer had already cleared. The money was gone. My hands trembled as I printed the transaction records. I needed to report this immediately, but something made me hesitate. The use of my credentials wasn't random. Someone wanted this traced back to me. I thought about who had been in the office late last night, and I remembered seeing Jake's car still in the parking lot when I left. I found Jake in the break room, nursing a coffee and looking surprisingly alert despite the rumors he'd been out gambling until the early morning hours. "Can we talk privately?" I asked, keeping my voice low. Jake followed me to an empty conference room, his expression neutral but his eyes watchful. $50,000 was transferred out of the company account last night using my login, I said, sliding the printout across the table. "Did you know anything about this?" Jake's face didn't change, but a vein pulsed in his neck. "Are you accusing me of something?" "I'm asking if you saw anything unusual." "You were here late." Jake stood abruptly. "So I'm your first suspect?" Classic Ethan, always thinking you're better than me. "Maybe you should look in the mirror before throwing accusations around." "I'm not accusing you, I'm trying to figure out what happened," I insisted, but Jake was already storming toward the door. "You want to take this to Dad? Go ahead. We'll see who he believes." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. I spent the next hour gathering more information, taking screenshots and notes. The transfer had been routed through 2 different banks before landing in an offshore account. I needed to bring this to Dad, but I wanted more evidence first. I decided to check the security cameras to see who had been at my computer. Before I could, my phone rang. It was our receptionist. "Your father wants to see you in his office immediately." When I entered Dad's office, Jake was already there, standing beside our father's desk with his arms crossed. Dad's face was granite. "Sit down, Ethan," he said, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. I sat, placing my folder of evidence on my lap. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you about the company accounts." "I know all about it." He cut me off. "Jake came to me this morning with some very disturbing information." My stomach dropped as Jake produced a folder of his own and handed it to our father. "These are printouts of transfers dating back 6 months. Dad said, sliding documents across the desk. "Small amounts at first, then larger ones. All using your login credentials. And all going to this account." He pushed a bank statement toward me. It was in my name, an account I'd never seen before with a balance of over $100,000. "That's not mine," I said, feeling dizzy. "I've never seen that account before. We also found this in your desk drawer," Jake added, producing a small notebook with account numbers and passwords, along with withdrawal receipts. The notebook looked like mine, same brand I use for work notes, but the handwriting was clearly forged. It was close enough to fool Dad, but I could see the differences. "This is ridiculous," I said, my voice rising. "I didn't take any money. Someone is setting me up." "Jake, tell him the truth." Jake's expression was a masterpiece of wounded innocence. "I didn't want to believe it either, Dad. That's why I investigated myself before bringing it to you." "You were at the office late last night," I countered. "The final transfer happened at 8:47 p.m., long after I'd left." "Check the security cameras." "We did," Dad said grimly. The footage shows you coming back around 8:30. My blood ran cold. That's impossible. I was home all evening. The cameras don't lie, son, Dad said, his disappointment palpable. And neither does this. He pulled out a final piece of evidence, a time-stamped photo showing someone who looked like me entering the building through the side door. It wasn't me. The figure was wearing clothes similar to mine, but was clearly Jake, wearing a baseball cap to obscure his face from the camera. But from the grainy security footage, the resemblance was close enough. Dad, that's not me. It's Jake wearing my jacket. You have to believe me. Dad's face hardened. Enough, Ethan. The evidence is clear. You've been stealing from this company from your family for months. Check my home computer, I pleaded. Check my actual bank accounts. You'll see I don't have this money. We've already called the police, Jake interjected. They'll investigate everything. I turned to him in shock, seeing the calculated malice behind his concerned expression. This was no impulsive act. Jake had planned this meticulously. Dad, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, I would never steal from you or this company. I love this family. I've worked hard here. Why would I throw that away? For a moment, Dad's certainty seemed to waver, but Jake stepped in. College loans, maybe? That new car you've been wanting? Who knows? People do surprising things for money. Dad stood up, signaling the conversation was over. I've decided not to press charges. A momentary relief washed over me until he continued. But I want you out of this company and out of my house today. I can't have someone I can't trust working here or living under my roof. Dad, please, I begged, my voice breaking. Just investigate further. Talk to Troy. Check the bank records more carefully. I've seen enough, he said, not meeting my eyes. Jake will escort you to clear out your desk. I expect your keys on my desk and your things out of the house by tonight. The humiliation of being walked through the office by Jake, with curious employees watching, burned like acid. Troy intercepted us in the hallway, his face concerned. What's going on? He asked, looking between us. Little brother's been cooking the books, Jake said loudly enough for others to hear. Dad's letting him resign instead of facing charges. Troy looked at me in disbelief. Ethan? It's not true, I said desperately. Troy, you know me. You've seen my work. Would I do this? Uncertainty flickered across Troy's face. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Jake interrupted. Just escort him out once he's packed his things. Troy nodded reluctantly, and Jake strode away victoriously. I didn't do this, I whispered to Troy as we entered my office. I want to believe you, Troy replied quietly. But the evidence was planted, I finished for him. By Jake. Troy helped me pack my few personal items into a box. Whatever happens, Ethan, take care of yourself, he said, genuine concern in his voice. That afternoon, I packed my belongings from my childhood home while Jake watched from the doorway, sipping a beer. You know, I almost feel bad for you, he said, not sounding remorseful at all. But you were always going to take everything from me eventually. Dads respect the company. I just accelerated the inevitable. I looked at my brother, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. You'll destroy yourself eventually, Jake. And when you do, I won't be here to help pick up the pieces. Big words from someone who'll be sleeping in his car tonight. Jake laughed. Good luck explaining to future employers why you were fired for embezzlement. I walked out of that house with nothing but 2 suitcases and a box of possessions, leaving behind the only family I had left. That first night in my car, parked behind a 24-hour grocery store, reality hit me hard. I had less than $3,000 in my checking account, no job, no references, and nowhere to live. The family that had defined my entire existence had discarded me based on fabricated evidence. I allowed myself one night of devastation, curled up in the back seat of my sedan, alternating between rage and despair. When morning came, I made a decision. I would rebuild my life from scratch, and one day, Jake would regret what he'd done. My gym membership became my lifeline. It provided showers, a place to spend time, and a way to burn off the anger that threatened to consume me. I applied for every job I could find, but word of my embezzlement had somehow spread through Portland's tight-knit construction community. Doors closed before I could even explain my side. 3 weeks into my new homeless reality, my old college roommate Michael called. "Dude, I've been trying to reach you for days," he said. "Troy from your dad's company tracked me down. He told me what happened." "Did he tell you I'm guilty?" I asked bitterly. "He said the evidence was suspicious and that he's never known you to make a single ethical mistake in all the years you worked there," Michael replied. "He's worried about you." Michael offered his couch until I could get back on my feet. I accepted, swallowing my pride. That same day, Troy called from a number I didn't recognize. "I can't be seen associating with you," he explained, "but I believe you were set up. I've been looking at those transactions more carefully. They're too perfect, too obvious. Can you prove it was Jake?" I asked hopefully. "Not yet," Troy admitted. "But I have a friend at Reynolds Construction. They need someone in their accounting department. It's entry-level, much below your qualifications, but it's something." I started at Reynolds Construction the following week at barely above minimum wage, despite having nearly completed my business degree. I worked days at Reynolds and nights finishing my degree online. My new coworkers were initially wary. Rumors had followed me, but my work ethic and attention to detail gradually earned their respect. 6 months in, I noticed Reynolds was using an outdated financial management system that was causing significant inefficiencies. On my own time, I developed a streamlined solution that integrated project management, payroll, and materials tracking. "This is impressive," my supervisor said after reviewing my proposal. "Where did you learn to do this?" "I've always had a knack for systems," I replied, downplaying my experience at Mitchell Construction. My system saved Reynolds over $30,000 in its first quarter. I was promoted twice within the next year, eventually becoming their financial operations manager. During this time, I met Wilson Hardwick, the owner of a construction software company who was visiting Reynolds to pitch his products. "Your internal system is better than what I'm selling," he admitted after seeing my work. "Have you considered developing this commercially?" Wilson became both mentor and investor, helping me refine my financial management system specifically for construction companies. By year 3, I had completed my degree, patented my software, and launched Mitchell Financial Systems. The irony of keeping my family name wasn't lost on me. It was both a reminder and a promise. The construction industry is notoriously slow to adopt new technologies, but my system addressed pain points other solutions missed. Word spread, and soon small to mid-sized construction companies across the Pacific Northwest were implementing my software. By year 5, I had 10 employees and a downtown office. By year 6, I had expanded to offering full financial consulting services to struggling construction companies, with a specialty in turning around failing businesses. The industry respected me as an innovative problem solver who understood construction from the ground up. I invested my profits wisely, building a portfolio of properties and stocks. I bought a beautiful house in Portland's West Hills, not far from where I grew up, though I carefully avoided places my father and brother might frequent. Sometimes I would drive past Mitchell Construction's headquarters, noting the decreasing number of trucks in the yard, the fading paint on the sign. I kept tabs on the company through industry gossip and public records, learning that they were losing major contracts to competitors and had downsized significantly. I felt no satisfaction in their decline, only a lingering sadness for what might have been. Throughout these years, I received no contact from my father or brother. I built a new life, created a new family from friends and colleagues, and tried to let go of the past. But the wound never fully healed. I was just better at living with it. Then came the industry conference in Seattle where everything changed. I was there to deliver a keynote speech on financial resilience in construction when I spotted Troy across the exhibition hall. Older now, gray at the temples, but unmistakably the man who had once mentored me. "Ethan Mitchell," he said, approaching with an extended hand. The industry's golden boy. I always knew you'd land on your feet, but this. He gestured to the conference program featuring my name. This is something else. We caught up over drinks that evening, carefully avoiding mention of Mitchell Construction until the third round. They're in trouble, Ethan, Troy finally said, staring into his whiskey. Serious trouble. I've heard rumors, I acknowledged neutrally. It's worse than rumors. Jake's gambling got out of control. Your father covered for him for years, but the last mistake. Troy shook his head. They're weeks away from bankruptcy. 37 families will lose their livelihoods. I kept my expression neutral, though something twisted inside me. That's unfortunate for the employees. Your father is a broken man, Troy continued. And Jake. Jake finally admitted what he did to you. Not to everyone, but to your dad. It destroyed what was left of their relationship. I said nothing, processing this information. They need someone who understands both construction and financial restructuring, Troy said, looking at me meaningfully. Someone exactly like you. That's not my problem, I replied, perhaps too quickly. Troy nodded. I understand. But I thought you should know. 2 days later, my phone rang with a number I still remembered by heart, though I hadn't seen it in 7 years. My father's number. The phone continued ringing in my hand as I stood frozen in my kitchen. 7 years of silence, and now, suddenly, my father was calling. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. This is Ethan Mitchell, I said formally, as if speaking to any business caller. There was a pause, then a voice that instantly transported me back to childhood. Ethan. It's your father. His voice sounded older, strained. I remained silent, unwilling to make this easy for him. I know it's been a long time, he continued awkwardly. I've heard you've done well for yourself. Your own company. That's good. What do you want, Dad? I asked directly, my free hand gripping the counter. Another pause. I was hoping we could meet. To talk. There are things that need to be said in person. About Mitchell Construction's financial troubles? I asked, letting him know I was already informed. His sharp intake of breath was audible. Yes. Among other things. Please, Ethan. One meeting. I should have said no. Should have hung up and continued my life without them. But curiosity and something else, something I wasn't ready to call forgiveness, made me agree. The Capitol Grill, downtown. Tomorrow at noon, I said. 1 hour of my time. That's all I'm offering. Thank you, he said, sounding genuinely relieved. We'll be there. We? I questioned. Jake will come too. He needs to be part of this conversation. I nearly cancelled right then but held firm. Fine. But I'm leaving at exactly 1 o'clock, regardless of where the conversation stands. I arrived at the Capitol Grill 15 minutes early, selecting a corner table with good privacy. The restaurant had become a regular spot for my business meetings. The staff knew me by name and respected my preference for discretion. The usual, Mr. Mitchell? Asked Roberto, my regular server. Yes, and I'm expecting 2 guests. They'll be arriving shortly. At precisely noon, they walked in. Dad looked significantly older than his 62 years, his once robust frame diminished, hair now completely gray. Jake appeared haggard, with dark circles under bloodshot eyes and a nervous energy that hadn't been there before. They spotted me, and I didn't stand as they approached. Small power moves, perhaps petty, but necessary for my composure. Ethan, Dad said, extending his hand, which I shook briefly. Jake offered his hand too, which I pointedly ignored. Let's skip the pleasantries, I said after they sat down. You have 55 minutes. Dad nodded, accepting my terms. First, I need to say something that's 7 years overdue. I was wrong about you. Wrong to believe what I was shown without proper investigation. Wrong to throw you out without giving you a fair hearing. I kept my face impassive, though the admission sent a jolt through me. Jake admitted everything to me 6 months ago, Dad continued, glancing at my brother, who stared at the table. About setting you up. About the embezzlement. I know what he did, I replied coolly. What I don't know is why you're telling me now, after 7 years of silence. Dad exchanged a look with Jake before answering. The company is in serious trouble. We've lost major contracts, our reputation has suffered, and our financial situation is dire. You're bankrupt, I stated flatly. Not yet, but within weeks if something doesn't change, Dad admitted. We've tried everything: loans, selling equipment, downsizing staff. Nothing has stopped the bleeding. And now you want my help, I concluded. The son you discarded when it was convenient. Jake finally spoke, his voice rough. I fucked up, Ethan. I fucked up with you, and I've been fucking up the company ever since. Language, Jake, Dad muttered automatically, then seemed embarrassed by the parental correction in this context. It's fine, Dad, Jake continued. We're not here to pretend anymore. The gambling got worse after you left, he said, addressing me directly. Much worse. I took more money. Made bad decisions trying to cover my tracks. Started drinking too much. The whole thing spiraled. There was no satisfaction in seeing Jake so diminished, only a hollow feeling where my anger had lived for so long. Mitchell Construction employs 37 people, Dad said. Good people with families, mortgages. People who've been loyal to us for decades. They'll lose everything if we go under. So will you, I pointed out. Yes, Dad acknowledged. But I'm old enough to retire, though with much less than I'd planned. It's not about me. What exactly are you asking for? I pressed, though I already knew. Your expertise, Dad said simply. Your reputation in the industry is exceptional. You've turned around failing companies before. We're hoping you can do the same for Mitchell Construction. And if that requires significant investment? I asked. We need to discuss terms, Dad replied cautiously. But yes, we're prepared to offer equity in exchange for capital. Jake hadn't taken his eyes off me. What he's not saying is that we're asking you to save the company that threw you away. We know it's a lot to ask. I studied them both, noting the desperation poorly hidden behind my father's dignity and Jake's newfound humility. I'll need to see your books, I said finally. All of them. Complete transparency. Before I make any decision. Relief washed over Dad's face. Of course. Whatever you need. This isn't a yes, I clarified. It's not even a maybe. It's I'll think about it after I see the extent of the damage. That's more than fair. Dad nodded. I checked my watch. You have 20 more minutes. Tell me exactly how things got this bad. They spent the remaining time outlining the company's decline. Jake's gambling had indeed worsened, resulting in nearly $200,000 embezzled over 3 years. When Dad discovered it, he covered the losses from his personal savings rather than press charges against his remaining son. The company took on risky contracts to stay afloat, several of which went badly, further damaging their reputation and finances. Your hour is up, I said, signaling for the check. I'll have my assistant contact you about accessing the financial records. Ethan, Dad said as I stood to leave. Thank you for hearing us out. I nodded curtly. I haven't agreed to anything yet. I know, he replied. But you could have told us to go to hell, and no one would have blamed you. I left them sitting there, walking back to my office with a storm of emotions I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. The next morning I called Troy. I need you to be completely honest with me, I said when he answered. How bad is it really? Troy sighed heavily. It's terminal without intervention. They've been operating in the red for nearly 2 years. Your father has mortgaged everything, including his house. The equipment is mostly leased now, and those payments are behind. 3 vendors have stopped extending credit. Payroll is a constant juggling act. Send me everything you can, I requested. Bank statements, contracts, payroll, outstanding invoices, debts, the works. Jake won't like that, Troy warned. Jake doesn't get a vote, I replied firmly. Either I get full transparency, or there's no discussion. The documents arrived that afternoon via secure file transfer. I cleared my schedule and spent the next 48 hours deep diving into Mitchell Construction's finances. The picture that emerged was even worse than Troy had indicated. The company that had once been valued at over $7 million was now worth barely a fifth of that. Equipment that had been owned outright was now heavily financed. The company's once sterling credit rating had plummeted. Most alarmingly, they had underbid several major projects just to secure cash flow, guaranteeing they would lose money on completion. I cross-referenced their client list with industry data. Despite everything, Mitchell Construction still had valuable relationships with several major developers. Their core team of project managers and site supervisors remained excellent. There was still something worth saving, if only for the employees who had stayed loyal through the decline. After 3 days of analysis, I met with Wilson Hardwick, my mentor, at his lakeside home. "You didn't come here for business advice," Wilson observed as we sat on his deck overlooking the water. "You know exactly what needs to be done financially. You're here because you're wondering if you should do it at all." I nodded, appreciating his directness. "They threw me away, Wilson. Based on fabricated evidence. Never even gave me the benefit of the doubt. And now you have the power to return the favor." Wilson noted. "The question is whether doing so would bring you peace." "What would you do?" I asked. Wilson considered this. "I'd remember that revenge and justice aren't the same thing. One heals, the other perpetuates the cycle. The employees don't deserve to suffer for my family's mistakes." I acknowledged. "No, they don't," Wilson agreed. "But neither do you deserve to sacrifice your hard-won peace for people who may not have earned your forgiveness." That evening, I sketched out 3 possible plans. The first was simple: decline involvement and let Mitchell Construction fail naturally. The second involved a consulting arrangement where I would advise but not invest. The third was comprehensive. I would invest substantial capital, restructure the company from top to bottom, and take majority ownership. The first option felt like abandonment of innocent employees. The second seemed half-hearted and unlikely to succeed. It was the third that kept drawing me back, despite the emotional complications. I called Spencer Reynolds, my attorney, to discuss the legal framework for such an intervention. "You need ironclad protections," Spencer advised. "Full control, no interference from former management, and contingencies for when they inevitably try to backseat drive." "When, not if?" I asked. "Family businesses are emotional," Spencer said. "No matter what they promise now, old habits will resurface. You need to be prepared for that." We drafted a preliminary agreement that would give me 60% ownership and full executive authority in exchange for immediate capital infusion and debt restructuring. The terms were stringent, including mandatory leadership changes and oversight mechanisms. "They'll never agree to all this," Spencer warned. "They're not in a position to negotiate," I replied. Next, I assembled a team from my own company to develop a turnaround strategy. We identified immediate cost-cutting measures, contracts to renegotiate, and operational inefficiencies to address. We projected that with proper management, Mitchell Construction could return to profitability within 18 months. I also contacted 3 investment partners who had worked with me on previous turnarounds. They agreed to participate, contingent on my direct involvement and the implementation of my financial systems. The pieces were falling into place, but one crucial element remained: what to do about my father and Jake. I spent a long night considering various scenarios, weighing justice against practicality, retribution against redemption. By morning, I had made my decision. I would help save Mitchell Construction, but on terms that would forever change the family dynamic. I would insist on full acknowledgement of past wrongs and create a structure that would protect both the company and myself from further damage. There would be no revenge that would only perpetuate the cycle of pain. Instead, there would be consequences and boundaries. Justice rather than retribution. I called my father. "I've reviewed your financial situation," I said without preamble when he answered. I've developed a plan that could save the company, but my terms are non-negotiable. What are they? He asked cautiously. We'll discuss details in person. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., at Mitchell Construction Headquarters. Have Jake and your attorney present. We'll be there, he promised. And Ethan, thank you? Don't thank me yet, I replied. You haven't heard my terms. That night, I finalized what I privately called the move they never saw coming. It wasn't what they expected. Either complete rejection or grudging, limited help. Instead, I was preparing something that would fundamentally reshape our relationship and the company itself. As I drove toward the familiar headquarters the next morning, I felt strangely calm. 7 years ago, I had left this place in disgrace, carrying a box of personal items while employees watched. Today, I was returning with the power to either save or end Mitchell Construction. The choice I was about to make would determine not just the company's future, but the possibility of healing wounds I had carried for too long. Driving through the gates of Mitchell Construction headquarters felt surreal. The once bustling yard was noticeably quieter, with fewer trucks and equipment than I remembered. The main building needed paint, and the iconic company sign was faded from years of sun exposure. It was a physical manifestation of the company's decline. As I parked in the visitor space rather than my old spot, a flood of memories washed over me from childhood visits with Dad to my final humiliating exit. I allowed myself a moment to acknowledge these feelings before locking them away. Today wasn't about the past, it was about deciding the future. Susan, the longtime receptionist, did a double take when I walked in. Ethan? She exclaimed, genuine warmth in her voice. Is that really you? Hello, Susan. I smiled. It's been a while. Too long, she said, coming around her desk to give me an unexpected hug. You look good. Successful. Thank you. I have a meeting with my father and Jake. They're waiting in the conference room. Everyone's talking about your visit, she added in a lower voice. There's a lot of hope riding on this. The walk through the offices was emotional. Familiar faces nodded or waved, some approaching to shake my hand or offer brief welcomes. These were people who had known me since I was a teenager learning the business. Their cautious optimism was palpable. Troy intercepted me halfway to the conference room. Ready for this? He asked quietly. As I'll ever be, I replied. Whatever you decide, Troy said. It's good to have you back in this building, even if just for today. The conference room fell silent when I entered. Dad and Jake sat on one side of the table, with a man I recognized as Walter Griffin, the company's longtime attorney. I took a seat opposite them, placing my briefcase on the table. Thank you for coming, Dad began formally. Let's get straight to business, I replied, opening my briefcase and removing several document folders. I've spent the past week conducting a comprehensive review of Mitchell Construction's finances, operations, and market position. I distributed copies of a summary report I had prepared. The company is effectively insolvent. You have approximately 3 weeks of operating capital remaining, outstanding vendor payments of over $600,000, and negative cash flow on 3 major projects. Dad and Jake exchanged grim looks as they scanned the numbers. However, I continued, the company retains several valuable assets, its reputation with certain key clients, a core team of experienced project managers, and decades of industry relationships. These intangible assets make a turnaround possible, though not guaranteed. What are you proposing? Walter asked, ever the practical attorney. I slid a formal proposal across the table. Mitchell Financial Systems, in partnership with 3 additional investors, is prepared to inject $2 million in immediate capital. In exchange, we would receive 60% ownership of Mitchell Construction and full executive authority. 60%? Dad repeated, his face paling. That's controlling interest. Yes, I acknowledged. Complete control of operations, finances, and personnel decisions. Jake finally spoke, his voice tight. So you'd be our boss. If you remain with the company, yes, I confirmed. But that's not a given. The tension in the room thickened. There are 3 non-negotiable conditions to this arrangement, I continued. First, Jake must resign from Mitchell Construction and agree to repay the embezzled funds according to a structured payment plan. Jake flinched but didn't argue. Second, Nathan Mitchell will transition to an advisory role only, with no executive authority. He will retain 25% ownership, with the remaining 15% distributed among key employees through a newly created stock option plan. Dad's jaw tightened, but he too remained silent. Third, I said, meeting my father's eyes directly, there must be a public acknowledgement to all employees and key clients about what happened 7 years ago. The truth about the embezzlement, the false accusations against me, and my unjust termination. Public humiliation? Jake muttered. Truth, I corrected firmly. After 7 years of living with your lies. Walter cleared his throat. These terms are extremely stringent, Ethan. Perhaps we could negotiate something more balanced. There is no negotiation, I replied. These are the terms. If they're unacceptable, we can end this meeting now. Dad studied the proposal, his expression unreadable. You've thought of everything. But why help at all? Why not just let us fail after what we did to you? 37 families, I said simply. Plus the subcontractors and vendors who depend on this company. They don't deserve to suffer for our family's dysfunction. Jake looked up suddenly. Our family? You still consider yourself part of this family? I'm a Mitchell, I replied evenly. That's a fact, regardless of how I was treated. Dad exchanged looks with Walter, who gave a small nod. We need time to review this properly. You have until tomorrow at noon, I said, standing. After that, my investors and I will pursue other opportunities. As I gathered my materials, Jake suddenly laughed a harsh, humorless sound. You've got us by the throat, and you know it. This isn't a negotiation, it's an ultimatum. Consider it justice, not revenge, I replied. I'm offering to save the company, not destroy it. That's more consideration than I received. I turned to leave, but Dad's voice stopped me. There's something you should know before you go. Something that might affect your decision. I turned back, waiting. Mitchell Construction isn't the only thing in jeopardy, Dad said quietly. If the company goes under, the bank will foreclose on my house. I've mortgaged everything to keep us afloat. I'm aware of your personal financial situation, I replied, unmoved. What your father isn't saying, Walter interjected, is that he's also used his personal assets to guarantee the employee's pension fund. If Mitchell Construction fails, those pensions go with it. This was information I hadn't uncovered in my investigation. It changed the stakes significantly. I'll expect your answer tomorrow, I said, keeping my voice neutral despite this new revelation. As I turned to leave again, Jake suddenly stood. Wait. Just wait. I paused, studying my brother's face. The arrogance that had once defined him was gone, replaced by something that looked remarkably like remorse. You don't need to wait until tomorrow, Jake said. I accept your terms. All of them. I'll resign, repay everything I took, and publicly admit what I did to you. Dad stared at Jake in surprise. I've destroyed enough, Jake continued. The company, Dad's retirement, your life for 7 years. I'm done causing damage. I hadn't expected this. My plan had accounted for resistance, negotiation, perhaps even rejection, but not immediate capitulation, especially from Jake. Jake, Dad began, but my brother cut him off. No, Dad. It's time. I've been living with this for too long. He turned back to me. I started gambling in college. Small bets at first, then bigger ones as the debts grew. By the time Ethan caught those first discrepancies, I was already in for over $30,000. When he confronted me that day about the $50,000, I panicked. The setup wasn't planned long in advance, it was desperate self-preservation. Dad listened, his expression growing increasingly pained. The worst part, Jake continued, wasn't taking the money or framing Ethan. It was watching you believe it so easily, Dad. Watching you throw away your relationship with your son without even a real investigation. Dad seemed to age another decade before my eyes. I don't expect forgiveness, Jake said to me. I just want to stop the damage. Accept the proposal, Ethan. Save the company and the people who work here. I'll be gone by the end of the day. The meeting room fell silent. This wasn't how I had envisioned this confrontation unfolding. I had prepared for defiance, for reluctant acceptance, even for outright rejection, but not for Jake's apparent surrender and self-indictment. We still need to review the full documentation, Walter said, breaking the silence. But in principle, it seems we're in agreement. One more thing, I said, making my decision. There's something I haven't told you yet. I reached into my briefcase and removed a final document. 3 months ago, when industry rumors about Mitchell Construction's financial troubles began circulating, I started quietly purchasing your outstanding debt from creditors. Dad's head snapped up. What? Mitchell Financial Systems now holds 70% of your company's debt, I explained. Which means that if I chose to, I could force an immediate bankruptcy and liquidation. The color drained from my father's face. So this entire negotiation was a courtesy, I finished for him. I could have taken everything without discussion. Instead, I'm offering a path forward. Jake stared at me, then began to laugh, genuine this time. The move they never saw coming. You outplayed us before we even sat down at the table. Dad seemed unable to process this final revelation. Why? He asked simply. Why not just end us if you had the power all along? Because destruction is easy, I replied. Rebuilding is the harder path. I learned that lesson 7 years ago when I had to rebuild my life from nothing. I gathered my materials and stood. I'll return tomorrow at 9 to begin the transition, assuming we're in agreement. We are, Dad said quietly, still stunned by the realization of how completely I had controlled the situation. As I reached the door, Dad called my name once more. When I turned, I saw something I hadn't seen in decades, my father, with tears streaming down his face. I failed you, he said simply. As a father, I failed you completely. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know that I understand that now. I nodded once, not trusting myself to speak, and left the room. Outside in the parking lot, Troy was waiting by my car. Well? He asked anxiously. The company will survive, I told him. There will be significant changes, but the jobs are secure. The relief on his face was immediate. Thank you, he said simply. Be in the conference room tomorrow at 9, I instructed. You're being promoted to CFO. As I drove away from Mitchell Construction, I felt lighter than I had in 7 years. Not because of victory or vindication, but because I had chosen the harder path, one that might, eventually, lead to healing. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I moved into the CEO's office at Mitchell Construction, though I maintained my role at Mitchell Financial Systems through a newly appointed executive team. My days were consumed with implementing the turnaround plan, meeting with creditors to renegotiate terms, and rebuilding client relationships damaged by years of mismanagement. As promised, Jake resigned immediately. His desk was cleared by the time I arrived the morning after our meeting. Before leaving, he had written personal apology letters to me, our father, and the entire staff, acknowledging his embezzlement and the false accusations against me. It couldn't undo the damage, but it was a necessary first step toward transparency. My first official act as CEO was to call an all-company meeting. Employees filled the warehouse space, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, hope, and anxiety about their futures. Many of you remember me, I began, standing on an improvised platform. For others, I'm just a name from company history. Either way, I want to be clear about why I'm here and what happens next. I outlined the company's financial situation honestly, but emphasized the path forward rather than dwelling on past mistakes. Mitchell Construction will survive and eventually thrive again, I assured them. No immediate layoffs are planned. In fact, we'll be strengthening key departments as we rebuild. The relief in the room was palpable. These people had been living with uncertainty for months, watching the company deteriorate while fearing for their livelihoods. I believe in what this company can be, I continued. I believe in the expertise and dedication in this room. Together, we're going to write the next chapter of Mitchell Construction. After the general meeting, I held a special session with the 15 longest-serving employees, many of whom had known me since childhood. You've remained loyal through incredibly difficult times, I told them. That loyalty deserves recognition. I explained the employee ownership program we were implementing, through which they would receive shares in the restructured company. This isn't charity or sentiment, I clarified. It's sound business. When employees have ownership stakes, company performance improves. You'll care about efficiencies and quality even more because they directly affect your personal bottom line. Frank Chambers, a project manager who had been with the company for 22 years, spoke up. I appreciate the gesture, Ethan, but we need to address the elephant in the room. Your history with this company, with your family, it's complicated. How can we be sure this isn't temporary? That you won't sell us off once we're profitable again? It was a fair question. The stock agreement includes first right of refusal for employee shareholders, I explained. If I ever decide to sell my shares, you'll have first opportunity to purchase them. Additionally, I've structured the agreement so that employee shares can only be diluted under specific, limited circumstances. This seemed to satisfy most of them, though I knew earning their complete trust would take time. Troy stepped seamlessly into his role as CFO, working closely with me to implement new financial controls and transparency measures. His institutional knowledge proved invaluable during the transition. It's like the company can finally breathe again, he remarked one evening as we reviewed the first month's results under new management. People aren't walking on eggshells anymore. The most complicated aspect of the restructuring was my father's new role. As agreed, he moved out of the CEO's office into a smaller space designated for his advisory position. The physical relocation was straightforward. The emotional adjustment proved far more difficult. I found him standing in his new office the first week, staring at family photos he was arranging on a bookshelf. Among them was one I hadn't seen in years, my mother holding me as a toddler, with Dad and a young Jake beside us. She would be disappointed in how I handled everything, he said without turning, somehow sensing my presence in the doorway. I didn't disagree, but neither did I twist the knife. We have a budget meeting in 15 minutes, I said instead. Your experience with the Henderson project will be valuable. He nodded, accepting both the professional courtesy and the personal distance. Over the following months, a careful, professional relationship developed between us. Dad proved his value in advisory meetings, offering insights on client relationships and construction approaches that saved considerable time and resources. He never overstepped his boundaries or questioned my decisions publicly, though he occasionally offered private suggestions that I often found helpful. Our personal relationship thawed more slowly. We began with brief conversations about business, gradually expanding to casual lunches where we discussed industry trends and eventually, cautiously, family matters. I've started talking to Jake again, Dad mentioned during one such lunch, about 6 months into the new arrangement. He's in a treatment program for the gambling. Seems committed this time. I nodded but offered no comment. He asks about you, Dad added carefully. What do you tell him? The truth. That you're doing an exceptional job with the company. That you're fair but firm. That you haven't mentioned him. That evening, I received an email from Jake, the first direct communication since his departure. It was brief, simply asking if I would be open to meeting someday when he completed his treatment program. I didn't respond immediately, needing time to consider whether such a meeting would be constructive or merely painful. Meanwhile, Mitchell Construction began showing signs of recovery. We secured 2 major new contracts based on our restructured operations and improved financial stability. Employee morale improved as the immediate threat of bankruptcy receded. We implemented my financial management software company-wide, resulting in significant efficiency improvements. By the end of the first year, we had returned to modest profitability ahead of my 18-month projection. To celebrate, I authorized bonuses for all employees and hosted a company picnic where families could meet and reconnect outside the workplace environment. I watched from a distance as Dad played with employees' children, showing them how to throw a perfect spiral with a football. He had always been good with kids better, ironically, than with his own sons. Troy joined me, handing me a cold drink. "Quite a transformation in 12 months," he observed. "The company and the people. Still a long way to go," I noted. "True, but worth acknowledging the progress." Troy hesitated, then added, "Your father's different too. More humble. More authentic somehow." I had noticed it myself, the way Dad now listened more than he spoke, the genuine interest he showed in others' opinions, the absence of the authoritarian certainty that had defined his leadership style previously. "Losing everything has a way of rearranging priorities," I said. 2 weeks after the picnic, I finally responded to Jake's email, agreeing to meet at a coffee shop halfway between the city and the treatment facility where he was completing his program. He looked healthier than when I'd last seen him, clear-eyed and more substantial, having regained weight lost during his darkest period. "Thank you for coming," he said, not attempting a handshake or hug, respecting the boundaries I had established. "How's the program?" I asked. "Brutal in the best way," he answered honestly. "Forces you to face exactly who you've been and what you've done. No excuses." We talked for nearly 2 hours. Jake didn't ask for forgiveness or attempt to minimize his actions. Instead, he outlined his recovery process, the amends he was making to others he had harmed, and his plans for the future, modest plans that notably didn't include returning to Mitchell Construction. "I'm looking at counseling certification," he explained. "Working with other gambling addicts. Using the disaster I created as a roadmap for what not to do." As our meeting concluded, Jake slid an envelope across the table. "The first repayment installment," he said. "It's not much compared to what I took, but it's a start." I accepted the envelope without checking the contents. The amount mattered less than the commitment it represented. "I'm proud of you," I said, surprising both of us with the admission. "Recovery isn't easy." "Neither is rebuilding a company after your family destroys it," Jake replied with a sad smile. "Guess we're both doing hard things." By the 18-month mark, Mitchell Construction had stabilized completely. We had repaid or restructured all outstanding debt, implemented comprehensive financial controls, and begun rebuilding our equipment inventory with strategic purchases rather than expensive leases. I called another all-company meeting, this time to announce an expanded employee ownership program. 20% of company shares would now be allocated to employees based on a formula considering both tenure and performance. Mitchell Construction was built on the idea that quality work and integrity create lasting value, I told the assembled staff. For a time, we lost sight of those principles. This ownership program ensures that those who uphold these values share in the success they create. The announcement was met with enthusiasm, especially from younger employees who saw it as an unprecedented opportunity for long-term financial security in an industry known for volatility. After the meeting, Dad approached me. "Your mother would be proud of what you've accomplished here," he said quietly. "I think she'd be proudest that the company is taking care of its people," I replied. He nodded. "She always did say that business was about more than balance sheets." This simple exchange marked a turning point in our relationship, the first time we had invoked my mother's memory without accompanying pain or recrimination. As we approached the 2-year anniversary of the restructuring, I realized that what had begun as a business recovery project had evolved into something more profound, a study in resilience, redemption, and the possibility of building something new from the ruins of betrayal. The company that had once expelled me in disgrace was now thriving under my leadership. The father who had chosen to believe the worst of me was now working alongside me with newfound respect. The brother who had destroyed my life was rebuilding his own on more honest foundations. None of it erased the 7 years of exile or the pain that came with them. But there was a symmetry to the journey that offered its own form of justice, not the vengeful kind I had once craved, but something more lasting and constructive. In the end, success truly was the best revenge, though revenge no longer seemed like the right word. What I had found instead was something like peace, the knowledge that I had chosen the harder, but more rewarding path of rebuilding rather than destruction. Life rarely offers perfect resolutions to profound injuries. There is no complete healing of some wounds, only the formation of scars that remind us of what we've survived. But in choosing how to respond to betrayal, I had discovered a truth more valuable than vindication. That we can build something meaningful from the very experiences meant to destroy us. What do you think about my decision to save the company instead of letting it fail? Would you have made the same choice if someone had betrayed you so deeply? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences. Thank you for listening to my journey from betrayal to rebuilding. Remember, sometimes the best response to those who try to destroy you is to succeed beyond their wildest imagination.